I used to hear a voice, and it used to tell me that it was a journalist, and used to tell me the news. Whether you want to call that an imaginary friend, or whether you want to call it a jinn, I don't know what you want to call it, but that's what I remember, and it used to tell me the news, and it used to tell me it was and I used to tell my parents, like, oh, there's a journalist that speaks with me, and it was like, what? That's really weird. And from that age, I was like, I want to become a journalist.
Welcome to another episode of the I Love Monday podcast. Today we have the founder of the Muslim Influencer Network, Omar Dacosta-Shahid. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Actually, now I'm intrigued about your name.
You know what? It does intrigue people. So I'm mixed race. I may not look that mixed race. I probably look more Pakistani, but I'm mixed race. My mother is on my mother's side is Jamaican, Chinese, Portuguese, Indian.
Wow.
My father's side is Pakistani. Although they moved to Kenya, as many Indians, Pakistanis did back in like the 50s and 60s. So all my family on my mum's side are all Dacostas. My mum is Dacosta, and Dacosta is a Portuguese name. Although if I'm going to complicate it a bit more, apparently that the Portuguese Dacostas originally came from Syria.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot of mix in that side of my family. My mum's father was a Sikh who wore turban.
From
India.
From India. Okay.
Yeah. And then her mother was Chinese. And then from my granddad's side, it's Jamaican, Portuguese.
Okay.
So I grew up eating like a lot of plantain, ackee and saltfish, rice and peas, chicken, because there was that Jamaican side that I kind of had in my heritage. So all my family on my mum's side are all not Muslim.
Oh, okay.
And my mother converted to Islam when she married my late father. So it's a very interesting mix, and I'm grateful for it because you get to your horizons broaden when you are around diverse people.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting family mix that I have.
So how was your childhood and growing up? Because I'm assuming it would be slightly different because you're surrounded by different nationalities. Whereas, for example, I was just surrounded by Indians, and the community was South Asian. So how was it growing up?
Yeah, so I was kind of raised by a few different people in some sense. So mostly by my parents, but for a large portion of my childhood, I spent with my grandmother from my mum's side, who was a church-going Christian, and also largely brought up with one of my aunties from my dad's side, who's Pakistani. But the area in which I lived was a very white area. Woodford Green.
Okay.
So that's where I grew up for like the first 15 years of my life, maybe more than that. So most of my friends were white and so on. I grew up with all that diversity in a white area. I was probably the only Muslim in my primary school. In secondary school, it was like the complete opposite. So I moved to a secondary school in Ilford, a private school, which was all Asian.
Cranbrook
College, yeah, which is closed down now.
Yeah.
There was like one white kid in the school, and it was like the opposite. Lots of Muslims. Well, it was a very small school. So that was interesting to have that shift. So yeah.
Okay. So how, that shift, did it change you in any way? Because obviously you've got 11 or 6-7 years of primary school in one complete different environment, and then secondary school in a different environment. Did that have any kind of impact on you?
I think it all contributed to the person I am today. And I like to think I'm relatively open-minded, and I can kind of, I'm comfortable with many different types of people. I think going from a white area to an Asian area I think allowed me to recognize that life is multicultural and there's lots of different color, metaphorically and obviously, with people's ethnicities and backgrounds, and it just gave me a good appreciation of the world, and then combined with that, my parents, I traveled a lot with them. So in 1 year, for example, I think in 2009, I went on 5 different holidays in 1 year with my parents, like around the world. So there was that traveling aspect as well, which contributed towards that.
What kind of countries were you going to?
So like Malaysia, Turkey, European countries, Egypt, various different.
So you're just being exposed to different cultures.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there any one culture that was pushed on you?
So this is really interesting. So if you were to ask me, what do I feel? Like, what ethnicity do I feel? I don't feel like any one ethnicity. Like, I don't feel Pakistani. I don't feel any of the other ethnicities that are in me. Because my mother is like a Western convert, and my father was from Pakistani heritage, I didn't grow up in an Urdu speaking household, so therefore I didn't pick it up. So I was speaking English. I didn't grow up with a strong sense of a particular culture.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like anything growing up, anything particular, but I could relate to different cultures, but I didn't feel like one. That makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
And even till today, I still kind of don't feel like at home with any particular culture.
So going on to your university, you studied journalism. Why?
So if you want the honest answer, might sound a bit crazy. When I was about 7, I used to hear a voice, and it used to tell me that it was a journalist, and used to tell me the news. Whether you want to call that an imaginary friend, or whether you want to call it a jinn, I don't know what you want to call it, but that's what I remember, and it used to tell me the news, and it used to tell me it was and I used to tell my parents, like, oh, there's a journalist that speaks with me, and it was like, what? That's really weird. And from that age, I was like, I want to become a journalist. Like most people, when they're like in sixth form in college, they still don't know what they want to do at university. They kind of like just make something up. But I was very sure from the age of 7 that I wanted to become a journalist, and I did. I studied journalism at City University, which apparently is the best university in Europe for journalism. While I was at university, I started writing for big publications like The Guardian, Times, Independent, New Statesman, and so on. I interviewed lots of famous people and so on. Then I pursued journalism for a little while after university, and then, as I said, I had early retirement from journalism. I gave it up for a few reasons. So
this crazy story about the imaginary voice, what kind of news did it tell you?
I can't remember too much. I think I do remember it telling me something about when Princess Diana passed away or something like that. I mean, I was like 6 or 7, so I can't remember what it used to speak to me about.
Yeah.
Who knows what that was?
How long did that last for?
Probably like, I don't know, a year.
Okay.
A year.
And then since then you've just been fixated on like the news, journalism.
Not so much anymore.
Yeah.
So I was like, for like in my late teens and so on, I was reading like The Economist and the New Statesman, and then I had to read that when I was at university. They encourage us to read a newspaper every day as part of like our learning and so on. So yeah, I did have that side, but it's kind of left me. And what I think it was all leading to was I wanted to pursue journalism because I felt like it was an honorable thing to do. That you can uncover stories, you can cover marginalized communities, you can talk about important issues, and so on. And when I felt like I couldn't do that anymore, and when I felt like my the things which I wanted to talk about were being blocked and in favor of like sensationalism and clickbait and all that kind of stuff. When I used to present like interesting stories about Muslims, positive stories, they weren't always of interest to these publications. But if it was a negative story, if they would hear about a negative story, they'll be fast to jump on it. So I was like, don't really want to be part of this industry. So I left the industry, and I was like, how can I channel that desire to want to do something positive in the world somewhere else? And that's when I kind of fell into marketing.
So them stories that weren't really getting published, the ones you said, the positive ones, is that mainly about Muslims, or is that just generally the positive ones weren't getting published?
It was mostly about Muslims. So I'd pitch positive stories about Muslims, like this particular Muslim has done this amazing thing. Look what the community's come together and done this.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always of interest. Most of the time it wasn't.
Did you get any reasons why?
Not particularly, no. I did have, that was just one thing among many while I left
Yeah.
journalism. Like I had like some publications, like I'd present an idea to them, it's called pitching, and they would take the story and publish it.
Yeah.
And I remember one time a journalist did that, and I complained to the editor, and the editor apologized and said, sorry, that's really bad what we did. So there was multiple things, and I just felt like the industry, how the industry was at the time and still is, it wasn't conducive to what I wanted to contribute to. So I thought it was better just for me to leave,
So what is it that you wanted to contribute to? Is it that positive news and...
Yeah, broadly it's having a positive impact in the world, but particularly showcasing how Muslims contribute to the world and how our faith is a positive impact in the world. So that was a large part of what I wanted to do in journalism. And then I thought, how can I do that somewhere else? So I went into marketing. I was working for a Muslim-led charity. And then that's where I met my business partner, and he came from a background in influencer marketing. And at that time, around like from 2013, 2014 up until 2017, I started to manage Muslim influencers. So I was managing Muslim influencers in sports, comedy, music. I managed a Indian photographer, like lots of different, I fell into it just by chance. So with my background in influencer management at the time, and with my business partner's background in influencer marketing, we thought, how do we come together to create the world's first Muslim influencer agency, which we conceived of in 2016 and then actually launched it in 2017. So that's really been what I've been focusing on the last 6 years.
What were your steps in launching the agency? Because it's a completely niche market you've gone into. So although you can get ideas from other businesses, it's there's no copy and paste. Like for example, with the business we're in, iCast will say you can copy and paste off other agencies. Your one, you can't do that.
No, that's the thing. There was no blueprint for us to follow. So there were influencer marketing agencies, but there wasn't any agency in the world at the time that focused on Muslim influencers. So we had a lot of struggle because there wasn't anyone we could get advice from who could say, oh, this is how you do it. There weren't even Muslim influencers that we could say that could tell us, oh, we've worked with this agency before. It was like completely starting from scratch, But we got a lot of support. There was a lot of positive sentiment. People understood what we were trying to do, which was empower Muslim influencers. Our original strapline was empowering the influencers of today to better the society of tomorrow. And we wanted to do that with Muslim influencers. So we recognize that the online and the social media world is just crazy. There's no framework in which Muslims know how to operate. It's all quite narcissistic.
Yeah.
And we're like, how do we channel that energy that they have to creating positive content? So that's what we wanted to do. And that's why we did things like we arranged influencer meetups. So our first one in summer 2017, we had influencers fly in from across the world to meet each other, and then they're inspired because we had Muslim scholars speak to them. So we had a second one in Toronto in Canada with Canadian Muslim influencers. We had Omar Suleiman, if you're familiar with him, Sheikh Omar Suleiman, give a talk to them. So there was always this underlying effort from us to want to inspire Muslim influencers to use their content and their platform for good, right? That was obviously the kind of social impact element of our business. The business function is creating marketing campaigns with our Muslim influencers to help brands target the Muslim economy. So,
what kind of feedback did you have from the initial Muslim influencers that you approached?
So it was interesting because on the one hand, some of them were like, would prefer to be managed by a mainstream agency rather than a Muslim influencer agency. Some of them were like, this is really good, like our own space, for Muslim influencers. So there was kind of, it was mixed in that sense. Everyone was supportive of what we were doing. So, yeah, I think the Muslim influencers liked what we're doing, and we had a lot of them wanting to join us at the time. So yeah, at the beginning it was like very exciting, but then you kind of have lots of business problems, as every business does, that we had to confront.
What kind of problems were you facing at the beginning?
So one of them, purely from a business perspective, was the fact that brands only really wanted to work with us in Ramadan, because they saw Ramadan as like the key season in which to target Muslims. So the first like 3 to 4 years of business, it was a real struggle, because it's like we would make a lot of money in Ramadan, and then outside of Ramadan, okay, there were some Muslim businesses that would work with us, but mainstream businesses that would pay us the large amounts of money, they weren't interested, and they were like, it's almost like Muslims only exist in Ramadan, So we had that issue, and then also influencers generally can be sometimes difficult to work with. They can be flaky, and because the Muslim influencer scene is a lot more smaller and niche compared to the broader the broader influencer scene, the quality of Muslim influencers, or the amount of quality Muslim influencers, is very limited. So the ones who are very creative and very professional, you're talking about like 1% of the Muslim influencers that exist. So finding the right Muslim influencers, A, to work with, B, to manage, and C, ones we believe there's a long-term vision with, it was like very, very limited. So there was the business aspect, which we were struggling with, and then there was also the fact that Muslim influencers, most of them, weren't necessarily great to work with.
So the business aspect, where you were finding it difficult to get brands outside of Ramadan, how did you overcome that?
So to some extent, we didn't overcome it. We had to double down on finding Muslim brands outside of Ramadan, but we had serious cash flow issues, like outside of Ramadan. So that's something that was a real struggle for the first few years. Then what started to happen was there was this recognition by mainstream brands that, the Muslim market is really big, it's important, and it makes sense to work with them, in Ramadan and beyond Ramadan. So we started to, for example, then we started to do like Eid al-Adha campaigns. We worked with like Vita Coco and like the UN and various others. So it's only really like in the last 2 to 3 years that there's been a real great appreciation of the Muslim market by mainstream brands and so on. And even like you see in a lot of big companies now, like you see the CEOs, they fast themselves for 1 or 2 days in Ramadan. So the appreciation developed over time to some extent. And one of the most important things in business is timing. I almost think we launched a little bit too early. If you look at, for example, YouTube launched at the perfect time when there was enough digital penetration and broadband speeds and so on. There were other YouTubes before that, but they all failed. And luckily, we did launch a bit early, but the recognition did come off the Muslim market a few years down the line.
And the part where you say that influencers are a bit more difficult to work with, but there's only a handful of really good influencers, why do you think that is? Is there like a specific reason, or? So
the first thing is you don't train to become an influencer.
Yeah.
It's almost, to be a bit crude, some people just wake up one day like, I want to become an influencer. If I wanted to, I could have become an influencer, like on Instagram and TikTok. Like I had the contacts, I've got a marketing agent to support it, but I decided not to because I don't necessarily want fame, and I don't think fame is a good thing. And this is a side point. Like I think people should be really careful about fame. And today, like one of the most common jobs that young people want, professions, is to become an influencer. Like in most of the Western world, becoming an influencer among like Gen Z and the generation below that is like the number one thing they want to do. And people don't actually realize the consequences of fame and the responsibility that influence has. And also the backlash that you're going to get, you know, the hate, the trolling and all that kind of stuff. So my advice to anybody is don't become an influencer, which might sound counterintuitive, the fact that I've got an influence agency. But my belief is that if you've got a particular skill or you've got a particular, you know, something you want to say which is important, say it, you know, show the world your skills and your talent, but don't seek fame. There's a fine line, you know, between the two. So if you think to yourself, I want to become famous, you'll probably be destroyed by that fame. And I've seen it over and over again. I've worked with influencers, managed them, who have become globally famous, and I've seen what's happened to them psychologically, spiritually, the challenges and the tests that they face. And I wouldn't wish that for anybody, you know. And people don't realize what they're getting into when they're becoming influencers. That's a massive side tangent to the question that you asked, which is why aren't there that many talented Muslims? Today there are a lot more, but like I said, there's no training, and a lot of the influencers that emerge don't necessarily come from corporate professions or have corporate jobs, and therefore there are things like their communication, you know, understanding briefs and timelines and deadlines and, you know, the quality that's needed by brands. That appreciation isn't always there. So we noticed that, for example, if influencers has a corporate job or had a corporate job, their level, the quality of their work and their content is often a lot higher, you know. So those are some of the reasons.
So, you know, when, for example, influencer comes to you, do you build out a strategy for them? So when you build out a strategy, because the influencer market has only been around for a very short amount of time, so how do you future-proof them? So how do you, for example, a 20-year-old comes to you, obviously they're not going to do the same things when they're 30 or 35, but how do you future-proof them? Because I'm guessing that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, so we have this this plan with influencers, love, life, learn, and legacy, and it's quite a holistic strategy that we create for them. So love being, how do we look after their mental well-being? You know, how do we make sure that they're okay? You know, beyond just being an influencer in their home life. You know, their relationships and so on. Then it's life. You know, how do we make sure that they are progressing where they want to go, and that they have an understanding of what they want to achieve, and that fundamentally, how do we make sure that they're earning enough money? Because often with influencers, there's this cognitive dissonance where they're famous, but they have no money, and it really troubles them because they're like, everyone knows who I am, but I don't even have enough money for petrol. And we notice that over and over again. So it's their finances are really important. Then it's learning. You know, how do they go on that journey of being lifelong learners of not just their craft, but just as a human being? So how do we equip them with the knowledge that they need? And then finally, it's legacy. Legacy is in 20, 30 years' time, how do you leave something behind that's meaningful? Whether it's a digital asset like their social media pages, or whether it's helping them create an organization, a business, a charity. So we might, for example, go into business with them, and you know, we split the equity, and we create the foundations for their business, and they're spearheading it, they're leading it. So love, life, learn, and legacy is generally the strategy that we create for them in order for them to have a holistic idea of where they need to go and what they need to do.
So you actually help them create something for the future financially, which is probably something they don't necessarily have the expertise to do.
Yeah. So it's something that we haven't done much of, but for the next stage of what we want to do, it's largely about transitioning to becoming business partners with these influencers to create products and brands which are A, going to be high revenue for them, and B, are going to create social impact. So if we combine these two things, we think it's a good formula, because you have the mechanics of creating a functioning business, and then you also get to do something positive in the world. So through these brands and through these products, we want influencers to make a meaningful contribution to the world and tackle important issues.
So you're now 6 years into your journey. What kind of challenges have you faced? Your more recent challenges that, even though you might have been performing well, but away from the finance side, what kind of business challenges have you faced?
Too many. So in this time last year, we had like a team of between 20 to 26 staff, and today we've got one full-time team member, and then freelancers and contractors that we work with closely. So that was a massive and traumatic period, the past year, going from a small to medium size team to really cutting down, but there were so many learnings in it.
Why did you have to cut down?
Fundamentally, the business wasn't doing well enough.
Okay.
We had a whole host of issues. So as we were trying to scale, we didn't necessarily have the processes in place to facilitate that. So we were growing, revenue was growing and so on, but then cracks started to emerge in our business, and that just opened the floodgates to a lot of different problems which we weren't foreseeing. And and then we had financial issues as well, with clients leaving us and clients ran out of money. We were working with a lot of startups at the time, and startups there's an instability about them, often because of they don't have the cash, they don't have investment, and so on. So a lot of the startups we're working with ran out of money, and that meant that they couldn't work with us anymore. So that was a learning for us. Is we actually thought it was a good strategy to work with exciting, growing startups, but we learned the hard way that that should only form a certain percentage of your clients. Mm. The majority should be big, stable brands who have the cash flow and so on. So there were lots of issues that we're facing at the time.
It's about diversifying your portfolio, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah.
How did it make you feel that you had to let go of 90+% of your team? Because that would have had a massive impact on you.
Yeah, it was. So I have a therapist, and I told my therapist about this, and when he listened to it, he said I would put that in the trauma category, like how difficult that was. So it was very difficult, and I think like mentally, physically, physiologically, it had a toll. Like at the time I was feeling like drained, I was feeling like lethargic, and all of that would have been due to elements of stress, and you'll know as a business owner, letting someone go is the worst thing. You hate to do it, but you have to do it, sometimes. So some of our team members, we let a lot of them go, and some of them were like, my friends have gone, I don't want to stick around anymore, and so on. So it was, mentally and physically, it had a toll, but it's actually a blessing. Right now, we've started to do a lot more strategy work, research work. So we recently completed a large exercise for a publicly listed company, doing qualitative, quantitative research, product development, product research, and so on, to help them understand the Muslim market, and so on. So a lot of our work is veering more towards that, rather than kind of campaign-based marketing, which can require a few more people to really do it well. So we're not dependent so much on having a large team anymore, because a lot of it is, kind of specialist skill that's needed, either by myself or my business partner, Saif, or Hadi, who works for us, or like the consultants, very experienced consultants that we have around us. So it's gone from that very tough time to doing a lot more interesting work, but work where there's like, it's not all due in a week. It's like, these are 6-month projects.
Yeah.
So we can kind of pace ourselves, So in many ways, it's worked out. It's worked out nicely for myself and Saif, in the sense that we're not as stressed. Having a large team is quite difficult. There's the people management and the politics and the problems of people, people problems and all that kind of stuff. We don't have to deal with it anymore. So right now we're quite content with where we are.
You were talking before about scaling up, and you didn't have the proper processes and systems to scale up. So if you are now planning to scale up again, how would you do it, and what would you do differently?
Yeah. Okay. So number one is you want to get the right people on the bus. You want, like any business, if it's a specialist business, you want to make sure that you have specialists and people with experience. So early days of the business, we were hiring people who we felt were good enough rather than world-class talent. And that's something that we only later on in the business, we started to hire kind of world-class talent. So you need the right people. In order to have the right people, you need the money. In order to have the money, you need to have a very good product which you can sell, product or service. In order to sell a very good product or service, you need a good sales team. Generally, startups, the sales team are the founders, who are generally the best salespeople. So you as founders need to know that you can sell, which is not an issue, hasn't been an issue for us. So there's a team, there's a product, there's a selling of that, and then there's the training. It would be the final component, I would say. So training means that everybody not just needs to know how to do their job, but everyone in the business should know how to do other people's job. So for example, if you are away from the business, that there's someone who can cover you. I'm not talking about like, a salesperson do a marketing person's job, but the broad things that people need to do in a business, like with systems and so on, everyone needs to know how to do them, and everyone needs to be trained on that. So you need to train people on it. It needs to be documented, and there should be a video. So you need to create those systems which scale and can be replicated and repeatable. So that's something that, especially, systems and processes is something that me and my business partner have known about for years. Like he's been very well trained on systems and processes, but we were too slow to implement them. So that's something that I'd really advise businesses is figure out what you need to do and how to get there, and then what systems and processes need to be in place in order to protect your business.
And to be honest, that also future-proofs your business, and then when you want to sell it, you've got your whole systems and processes. You can tell it's a well-run company that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you were building out your systems and processes, you did that after you let go of your team, or before?
So it's not like we didn't have system processes. We did. We had lots, but we didn't have enough. So as the processes needed in line with the scale, they weren't catching up. So there were new positions that we were hiring for. For example, like we had someone like head of HR, for example. We never had someone in HR before. We had someone who was operations, HR, and legal all kind of in one. So the fact that there was a new HR department, there weren't the systems and processes in place to properly accommodate that. So as we were growing, as there were new departments and so on, the process that we had weren't matching the new areas in which we're hiring for, and it was taking too long to catch up with that. So in short, the processes weren't happening quickly enough in line with how we were growing.
Okay. And when you finally built out all your systems and processes? Because now it seems like you have quite a detailed and thorough process manual, essentially. How did that impact your business?
Means that all our clients are happy with us at the moment. So one of the things about having an agency or service-based business is that you need to set expectations. And part of the way you set expectations is letting clients know that this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, these are the results you can expect, and so on. And now that we have, a lot of that in place, it means that A, you can manage expectations, and B, you can deliver on them. So in short, having the right processes in place ensure that you can actually deliver properly for your clients. So.
And have you actually noticed the difference in client satisfaction from before to now? In terms of, are they less complaints or more reviews?
Yeah, there is that. But we are only taking on a limited amount of clients at the moment. Naturally, we're a lean team. One of the difficulties is when we had a larger team, we had like dozens of clients at one point, and as an organization, being able to manage lots of clients is structurally difficult. So we're quite happy having larger clients, paying us like 6 figures and stuff like that, but doubling down on them and giving everything to them.
Yeah.
So that's a model that we're pursuing at the moment, which is working.
But does that also mean you've tried to go for different type of clients? Because before, if you're focusing on campaigns, whereas now a strategy, would that mean it's a complete different kind of client?
Not necessarily. So the strategy for a lot of the brands precedes the campaign. So we might work on a strategy for 6 months for a client, build out everything they need to know and everything they need to do, and they'll be like, okay, now we've got the strategy, we need implementation. So we can then lean on, which is what we were doing before, which is the campaign side. So the strategy often has to be implemented, and often they come to us to do that.
What's your 5-year plan now? Because it seems like you've had a really good start, then you've had to slow down a bit, and then you've changed a few bits, and now what's your next step that you're planning to go to?
The goal now is to double down working with a select few visionary Muslim influencers who want to create highly profitable businesses that scale, and also with those businesses create significant social impact. So that's only been a very small part of what we've been doing previously. We've been focusing on delivering for clients.
Yeah.
Now it's like we're shifting our model slightly to everything is becoming inward. We're working with influencers to create the brands rather than us finding brands that we want to work with. We want to create them with the influencers to create profitable businesses with them.
When you say social impact, what do you mean by the social impact? So what kind of impact and where do you want to see this going?
So we want the impact. So we'll be working with Muslim influencers, first of all. Many of those Muslim influencers will want to have an impact on other Muslims. So there are so many problems that Muslims are facing today, whether it's regarding, technology or social media or, general problems that affect everybody will also affect Muslims, but Muslims will have specific problems as well. And we want to work with these influencers to tackle a lot of these issues that the Ummah is facing. But also we want to work with Muslim influencers who have a broader horizon that can see global issues that affect everybody. Whether it's climate change, whether it's obesity, whether it's the food that we're eating, pollution, and so on, and create businesses around those to tackle those particular issues.
So if there was one social issue that you'd be able to solve, or you'd want to solve, what would it be and why?
Okay, me personally?
Yeah, you personally.
Yeah. So I'm really passionate about the idea of people becoming stronger, physically, mentally, spiritually. And I think that's at the heart of how we change society at the individual level. If we as individuals become stronger and more knowledgeable and just generally more robust human beings, we can all individually have an influence on society. So I just wish we knew more as a start. Like, for example, I was really happy that you gave me this glass bottle of water. I haven't told anyone. I haven't even told my wife this, by the way. I gave up drinking plastic, like water with plastic bottles a while ago, because it's not good for the environment and it's not good for you. People have no idea how much plastic we consume in our lifetimes. And I know that might sound like a really small micro example, but the proliferation of like plastic in our bodies has an impact on our mind, has an impact on like men's testosterone and sperm count. Has so many impact, and we don't realize that at the micro level, all these small things that we do have an impact on us, and everything that we do have an impact on society. So if we can become better people, stronger people, more knowledgeable people, more research people, it will have a wider impact on society. So I believe in the individual is really important. So I would want, the businesses that we create to help individual people on that journey to creating a better world.
So how would you implement a strategy that would create a better world to make people more robust? Because obviously there's raising awareness, that's like the first thing, but then after that?
So it starts with knowledge. People don't understand the world that we live in today. And, as a Muslim, one of the things that we're taught is that you have to understand the society in which you live. Because if you don't understand it, you won't know how to operate within it, and you won't know how to tackle the problems within it. So if everybody, Muslim or not or non-Muslim, can understand the consequences of the systems in which we've inherited, kind of turbo capitalism, neoliberalism, a very dominant secular world in which we've inherited, we can't tackle those things if we don't understand them, and we don't understand what they're leading to. So they're leading to give you a small example again, all this plastic which is polluting the environment is leading to us not thinking about the types of food that we eat. It's leading to not realizing the importance of spirituality, and prayer. It's leading to us polluting the world. It's leading to the debt-based river system which we've inherited, which means that we end up chopping down all the trees and taking all the fish out of the sea and doing all that kind of stuff in order to, because countries are in debt to other countries. And I know I've gone macro again, but all of that starts at the individual level, about us having knowledge of the world that we live in. We live in a society of bondage and slavery because of the debt-based society in which we live, which then creates all the problems that we have today. So that's why I'm very proud and passionate about my faith, because it warns us about these systems and how and the solution that Muslims have, the alternative that Muslims have. And we need to know that as Muslims that there is an alternative. There is an alternative to the systems that we've inherited, and it's through our faith. So knowledge of the world and knowledge of our faith combined together means that we can tackle the things that exist.
Do you think the lack of knowledge is a reason why Muslims have struggled to raise awareness about things like food, which is really important, environment, again, which is really important to our faith? Do you think it's a lack of knowledge that has made us not look after the environment on a macro level?
It is a lack of knowledge, and knowledge is at the heart of our faith. In some sense, you could very easily argue that the pursuit of knowledge is potentially more important than an individual by himself worshipping, for example, all like extra prayers that you're doing. I'm not talking about the daily obligatory prayers, but all the extra prayers, all the extra fasting, that actually is not as important as the pursuit of knowledge. because knowledge is the thing which allows you to understand the world and contribute meaningfully and help people. You can help yourself by praying and fasting, which is great. That's good for you, and you become a better person. You can help other people. But if you don't have knowledge, then you are at the mercy of what other people are telling you. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have today, is that we're not thinking. We go about our daily lives, we go to work, we come home, we have some food, we go to sleep, and we have no idea about how we're being influenced. So going back to the idea of like influencers, if you're either if you are an influencer, I think you have a responsibility to influence in the right way. But all of us have to recognize that there are mechanisms in place, subconscious, in the news, politics, all of these things are constantly influencing us. And we have to be aware of what's influencing us and the things which are influencing us. So you can only have that through knowledge of the present day and knowledge of our faith in order to understand how to tackle the issues of the present day.
I think when a person puts faith and knowledge together, automatically we think about, okay, our prayers, our fasting, our charity. We think about the specific worship-related knowledge. We don't generally think about the social knowledge or just the basic mannerisms or the business, the faith-based business knowledge that you also need if you're running a business. For example, just treating people nicely. That's all part of knowledge. So how do you convince and raise awareness that people need to actually learn about these other things that are happening in our world? And then, like you said, we're always being influenced, whereas if it's at work, social media, the general media, we're always being influenced. So how do you convince someone to say, you know what, there's other parts which we actually do need to learn about?
Yeah. So if you look at the quote-unquote golden age of Islam, which people like Ahmed Keela, who's an author, he would argue against this idea of a golden age, saying because it gives the idea that Muslims were only successful in one particular period of time, one particular place in Baghdad. What about like the Ottomans and the Muslims in Spain and so on? They had a lot of successes. During that golden age in Baghdad, the rulers and they would fund not just religious knowledge, but secular knowledge. And it was this combining together of the religious and secular knowledge that really allowed Muslims to prosper. And this is not just specific to medieval Baghdad, but across Muslim societies. When Muslims have tried to understand and have gone out their way to understand worldly matters and other worldly matters, that's when they really flourished. Because if you only want to understand Islam, you're not going to understand how to implement it in today's world, because you're going to be lacking that. And you'll also be maybe too otherworldly, and therefore you're not going to technologically progress. Like if you only have an understanding of Islam, you're not going to understand what's needed in order to progress technologically. If you only have secular knowledge, then you're not going to have the prerequisite or the requisite tools foundationally, like Islamically, to know how to the framework and boundaries in which you should be operating in. So Muslims historically have always thrived when they've brought these two together, and that's really, really important. And our world is constantly changing, and therefore our understanding of our faith also needs to change in line with our changing world. That's not to say that the fundamental principles of our faith changes or that the faith changes, but how we interpret our faith and how we apply it today needs to be thought about. You need to think about that. So for me, you can't actually be a good Muslim if you don't really understand the world that you live in, because your understanding is going to be someone's understanding from 700 years ago, where the context was completely different. So in order to be a person who is contributing meaningfully to the world and is doing the job of what a Muslim should be doing, it's to understand the world that we live in and how to operate within it. And you can't do that without studying and knowledge. And studying a knowledge, by the way, doesn't mean you have to go to a mosque or go to Egypt, whatever, to study. There's so much knowledge that you can gain from people locally, teachers locally, from YouTube. You train the algorithm on YouTube correctly, watching the right videos, it will like bombard you with other really good videos. So knowledge can come in different ways, but the main thing is to be on that journey of learning.
I think it's important when you're getting faith-based knowledge or Islamic knowledge to make sure you do go to the right people. But I think also you're right in the sense that when times change or as things evolve, you have to be aligned with that. For example, about 35 years ago when internet first came about, a lot of the scholars there would say, no, you're not allowed to use it. But after a while, they realized it's actually a medium. So yes, you can do bad, but there's also good. And it's about how you use it. And it's the same with social media today. And the good thing about social media is you can select the same way you said for the algorithm, you can choose who you follow. So if you want to follow the bad restaurants, and not the bad restaurants, the unhealthy restaurants, etc., you're going to be more inclined to go to the restaurants. Whereas if you're going to follow religious scholars or just people of knowledge, or not necessarily even religiously, secularly as well, then you're going to be more inclined and your thinking will change accordingly as well. Because then you're being influenced.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So this is the importance of influencing yourself. Like, we all have to become influencers. And this is a concept that I'm really passionate about, is that we are all influencers. So there is nothing that we can do, nothing that we can think that isn't going to impact other people. So let's say, for like a example, like let's say someone's smoking, they're like, oh, it's not harming anybody else, I'm smoking. It's like, you're probably going to get ill at some point. That's going to have an impact on your family. That's going to have an impact. Like, we all pay taxes for the NHS. Maybe, we have to pay our taxes because, you're smoking. I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about specific, I'm not talking about smokers just smokers. I'm talking about generally the idea that if you do something, it will always have a repercussion or a consequence. So we have to recognize that we are all responsible and accountable. And this is another thing which is really important. In traditional Islamic thought and understanding and fiqh, it's not the sole responsibility of the government to build the economy and to build a great society. It's responsibility of all of us. All of us have an important role in society to build a society and to help, right? We often complain, oh, the government's not doing this and my council's not doing this. It's like, okay, they have responsibility as well, but so do you. So if we can see ourselves as being important and having a role to play in society, it will massively change things. But all of us, we deprioritize ourselves and think that we've got no power and so on. It's like, how many individuals in history have changed the world? One person. There's nothing necessarily that different from people who've gone on to change the world to you or to me. It's just they had their mindset that they wanted to do it. And okay, some of the circumstances favored them and so on. But it starts with an understanding that you can make a change and you can make a change in society. And once you have that internal recognition, you can do a lot in the world.
How does a person get that internal recognition?
So I think it starts with this idea of knowledge.
Yeah.
This idea of knowledge. So you have to understand. There's two dimensions. There's understanding yourself, like trying to be authentic with yourself. There's a saying of the Prophet, peace upon him, which is attributed to him, but we don't know if he actually said it. Which is, he who knows himself knows his Lord. And there's this idea that there's this, once you know yourself, and on one level what you're good at and what you're not good at, and what you need to improve, and how you get to where you want to go, there's a much greater alignment between you and God, because you're therefore reflecting and living the word, the will of God, on earth, and you're aligned with that. Then there's your relationship with God, and there's your relationship with society. There's the vertical and the horizontal. So you need knowledge of both of these. Knowledge of yourself, which is knowledge of the nafs. How do you overcome the evil tendencies within ourselves. And that's a science, like the purification of the heart and so on, which Muslims traditionally have studied, which we've largely lost today. So understanding ourselves, the purification of the heart, which makes you a better person, and then understanding the society and how you can contribute to society. Where are the problems, and how can you as an individual, knowing your strengths and knowing what you want to focus on, improve society? So you might say, you know what, I'm really good at, I have a lot of knowledge, say, of fitness and food. So that's going to be my contribution to the world, is I'm going to make people physically stronger and make sure that they're eating the right food. That's just one small thing that you can do which have a massive impact. Likewise, other people might be like, you know, I've studied environmentalism. You know, I want to make sure that we're helping the planet, you know. So those two things, that inward alignment and outward alignment with society is the first place to start.
I think a lot of it comes with just recognizing, like you said, recognizing your strengths. And I think what happens is it's the mindset where a lot of people generally focus on their weaknesses. I'm not good enough. And I think that is a product of the environment where we're seeing so many other people better than us on social media that we forget that we're actually good at, for example, like you said, fitness. So if we just focus on that one thing, make it our niche, you create a much better impact. You can start locally and then build it globally. And with social media, and then with, for example, agencies like yours, where you can deliver that message even through brands or through strategy, however you plan it, then you can have that much bigger impact. What's some of the things that you've implemented in your life, or some of the habits you've implemented that helps you create a change?
So I think it's first important to recognize that things happen at different points in your life, and it's important not to beat yourself up if where you're at the moment is not where you want to be, because things often happen organically, and sometimes there's a trigger, sometimes it's a accumulation of things that you learn and experiences and wisdom that lead you to where you are today. So just to give you some examples, and this is, I'm not trying to in any way say that I'm better because of some of these things that I do, but like I try my best to fast to some extent every day. And that's not the Islamic fast, but for example, I will eat, say, between 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then I won't eat again until 11 a.m. And fasting, which is fundamental in our faith, is like the biggest talk of the town at the moment in like, you know, the science of food and health. You know, people like David Sinclair, who's probably the leading expert in the world on aging. He says that the number one thing you can do for your health is fasting, you know. So people just are constantly eating and snacking, which what that does is that raises your insulin levels, your blood glucose levels. And it's important to have an understanding of the food that you're eating. So for example, things like protein and meat are less likely to raise your insulin levels. Whereas, you know, carbohydrates and things like that will really raise your insulin levels. So people think they're eating well by having like toast in the morning and things like that. It's like that's going to rise your glucose levels and you're going to have a drop, you know. So people have all these mood swings and stuff like that. It's because we don't understand the effect our food is having on us, you know. And then in terms of diet, you know, us Asians, we love like rice and things like that. Honestly, you don't actually need that many carbs. You know, fruits are a type of carb. So you can get your sugars and carbs from fruits, which is a better alternative to grains. So there's nothing wrong with having like roti and rice and things like that every now and again, but you don't want to be having that like regularly. It tires you out, it makes you sluggish and lethargic and so on. So food and fasting. Then I try to go to the gym as much as I can. The gym is really important for a couple of reasons. Number one is fitness and exercise helps with your confidence. You know, there's this relationship between what you look like and the confidence that you portray. You know, it has a psychological effect on you. Plus it helps with clarity. You know, I don't know, you know, like people watching this, but if you go to the gym, how often do you have a good idea that comes to you.
Yeah, that's
You know,
true.
like you become a lot more like you're just working out, and it's like you have this great idea. You know, and that's because you're in a different environment, and plus you're in a more for optimal state because your body is working and you know and so on. So there's the food, there's the exercise, and then there's also the just generally seeking knowledge. And like I said, seeking knowledge is not in the traditional way of like going somewhere or so on, but just being on that lifelong journey of learning. And then finally, just all of that is irrelevant if you don't have good mental health, right? So you can have the best diet in the world, you go to the gym every day, but if you're not looking after your mental health, it makes no difference. The best thing you can do for your physical health is to have good mental health, because your mental health will mean that you can do the things that you want to do, like eat well and exercise. If you're not feeling great and you're suffering from bad mental health, you're less likely to want to eat well. You're less likely to want to go to the gym, and then it becomes a cycle, you know. So you know, look after your mental health / spiritual health. In fact, without having good mental health, you probably won't be able to have good spiritual health, because if you're not in a mentally good place, you're not going to want to pray. You're not going to want to fast. You're not going to want to be particularly good in society and so on. So mental health, spiritual health, physical health, all of it starts with, you know, that understanding that you can be better and you can work on yourself, and it starts with incremental changes. And those incremental changes for me start with seeking knowledge, because the knowledge is the thing which will inspire you to go out and take that action.
With physical health, it's a lot easier to see if you're struggling with it, and you can tell sometimes you've just had a bad few meals, or you're not going out for a walk regularly, or whatever it is, or you're not going to the gym as regularly as before, or you feel tired. But with mental health, you can't always tell when you're having a bad moment or bad day, or you're slowly going down. So how do you monitor your mental health, and what's the secret of having a good level of mental health?
The reason why I'm laughing is I'm not an expert on any of these things.
Of course, I know,
but you know, I'll chip in with my 2 cents. So your question was, how do you monitor your mental health and how do you work on it?
Yeah. So what's the secret of having a good level of mental health, or from your personal experience?
Yeah. Okay. So part of it is you benefit from your nature. That's a small element, but the biggest thing is essentially the company that you keep. I think that's a really important thing. So company that you keep is not limited to the people that you're physically around, it's also the people that you're listening to online. So if you follow the wrong people on social media, if you watch the wrong type of videos, if you become addicted, you know, to being online all the time, you're much more likely, I think, to suffer from poor mental health, because you're not being given the right things that your mind, your body, and your soul needs. So the very first thing is do an audit of the way in which you're living. So look at the day that you're living. How much time do you spend on YouTube? How much time do you spend on Netflix? How much time are you spending eating? How much time are you spending sleeping? And then you start one by one working on those things. So for example, let's say I spend 3 hours a day on Netflix every night. Okay, I'm not going to do 3 hours, I'm going to do 1 hour. And that's really important, is learning to change things incrementally. So like a few years ago, I used to have 2 toasts in the morning. I was like, you know what, it's not good. 2 toasts in the morning. It might not sound like a bad thing, 2 toasts. Like, what's wrong with having 2 toasts?
Yeah, it's better than having cereal.
Well, it depends what type of cereal. It depends what type of cereal. Depends what type of toast. Toast. If you are going to have bread, you want to have sourdough bread because it's fermented for longer. It's what people used to eat historically, and so on. Most cereals are full of sugar, although some cereals will be better than others. So anyway, I cut down from 2 toasts to 1 toast, which was like a relatively small thing. When you want to make a change, you want to make sure that it doesn't really have a real impact on you, because then you're going to stop doing it. If you feel like, I really don't want to do that. But going from 2 toasts to 1 toast was like, didn't even really feel it. It's like, it's a small change, but ultimately it ends up in a big change, because you go from 2 toasts to 1 toast over the space of 1 year, and there will be an improvement in your health. I went from 1 toast to not having any toast, you know. So the point I'm making is, you know, in this kind of silly example, is that choose the thing that you want to start with, and do something which is not too big for you to be like, I don't want to do that, it's too big for me. And then chip away at all these things in your life, and it will end up becoming like is the right term, like a waterfall effect. Like things will just start falling into place. I don't want to like pretend that my life is great or anything like that. I've got so much to improve. I'm like, you know, terrible in so many different areas of my life. But I'm trying, you know, I'm trying with as best as I can.
If you had a 21-year-old Omar Dacosta sitting next to you, just coming out of university, what would you say to him?
I would say you don't need to start a business too early. Most businesses fail, you know, full stop, majority. They're more likely to fail when you're younger. So you want to make sure that if you are going to start a business, you want to make sure that you really know what you're doing in that industry, you have experience in it, and you have the right team in order to achieve it. That's business. Number 2 is, I would say, to really make the most of time. You know, I felt like I was 21 just the other day. You know, now I'm about to turn 32. Where's that time gone? You know, it just flies past. And it's only when you recognize and value the importance of time that you really start to make the most of things, and you start to achieve a lot more. If you waste time, you will end up wasting your life. And as Imam Ghazali says, your time is your capital. You know, your time is the most important thing that you have, because once it's over, it's over. You know, so importance of time is really important. Knowing how to spend your time, like that's an art. Like knowing how do you spend your time. We have 24 hours in the day. How do you want to split that up? What things do you want to do? What things do you want to achieve? And then the third thing is, I would have liked a lot earlier to have a much greater understanding of how the world is impacting us, you know, psychologically, spiritually, and so on. Because the earlier you recognize that, the earlier you can create the systems in your life to challenge those things. So a lot of us spend like endless time on social media, not recognizing the harms that it does. Like we just spend a lot of our teens and our early 20s, and people even older than that, you know, spend a lot of time on social media. Imagine how productive you can be with your life if you limit your social media usage from 5 hours a day to 1 hour a day. And you were to use those 4 hours a day, if you were to accumulate those 4 hours a day over 10 years, and you were to do something productive in those 4 hours, imagine what you could achieve in the space of 10 years. So that ties into the value of time. So
I think with the topic of time, I think time blocking is important, and it helps you avoid distractions, because there's also that thing of you can be doing something productive and then you get a message on your phone. It's like, okay, cool, let me reply quickly now. And then to regain that focus to the level you had while you were doing your productive work takes at least 60 plus seconds. And then, so time blocking itself is very important to keeping productive, along with cutting down on the things like social media, which isn't necessarily productive for you.
Mm. Yeah, I would really encourage myself, everyone, to have a plan each day. You know, you don't want to just let time pass.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your morning, you know what you're doing in your morning. You know exactly what you're doing in your afternoon. You know what you're working on in the afternoon. You know what you're doing in the evening. You know what your nighttime routine is. You know what your morning routine is. You don't have these systems in place in your life. Things are just gonna, you're just going to end up being extremely unproductive. And I'm not. When I use the word productive, I'm not trying to say that we need to be constantly working all the time. Like productive in the sense that you're doing something beneficial, meaningful. Whether it's spending time with your children, whether it's spending time with your wife, calling your parents, you know, calling your family, working on yourself, making sure that you're thinking about what you want to eat and when to exercise. Like, we should be as methodical and planned as we can. What you're talking about is really like focused or deep work, like which Cal Newport came up with that term, which is the idea that whenever you're working on a task, you want to make sure that you're giving 100%, and therefore you want to minimize distractions. So if you're at work and you're working and you want to get something important done, you put your phone in airplane mode or you turn it off, you put it away, because that's going to distract you. When you're working, you don't want to be on WhatsApp you don't want WhatsApp on your desktop. Sometimes you maybe need to if it's part of your work, but you want to avoid as many distractions as possible. A, because it can divert you, and B, the quality of your work is not going to be as good because you're not going to be in that mind frame to get stuff done.
The same applies when you're spending time with family and friends, because you want to be present for that time. So if you're getting distracted by your messages, or you just want to have that habit of just scrolling on Instagram, then obviously you're not being present, and that affects relationships, goes down the whole route of affecting mental health, and then you just end up in a deep rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most underestimated qualities of a Muslim. And I know that not everyone listening to is a Muslim, but that's my background, is the importance of being present. If you look at, for example, the Prophet, peace be upon him, whenever he would meet people, he would turn his whole body towards them. It was also said that whenever it was with people, it was as if nobody else existed. So that presence, which is an incredible quality to have, is the thing which allows other people to feel valued. And when other people feel valued, it has a positive impact on their mental health, and they then have a positive impact on other people. So the idea of presence with people, being present with yourself and being present with God is really at the heart of being a true human being, and that's the nature of the age in which we live in today, is distraction. If we were to characterize the time in which we live, it's a time of distraction, diversion. You look at the word distraction in the dictionary, it actually means like a type of mental. It's got this connotation of being mentally in a bad place, right? So social media, our phones, technology, all of it is distracting, and if you look at like the name of shaitan, it comes from the idea that shaitan is the one that distances you. So by all the distractions that we're having today, they distance us from the life that we should be living and from worshipping God. So distraction is really a terrible thing, and we should never really try to be distracted. We should always be present in the thing that we're doing.
100% agree. Before we finish, we'll have a quick fire round.
Yeah.
This will be a really interesting one, this first one, because of your diverse background. Favorite food?
Ooh, Punjabi, Pakistani food.
Any specific dish?
I like saag chops, which is, I know not everyone is, I know people have like saag chicken or saag meat, but saag chops is something for some reason I grew up on, like I used to have that a lot. And then good old chicken curry is good as well.
You said you grew up with a lot of Jamaican food.
I did. So my mum, even though she wasn't not necessarily from a South Asian background, she learned to cook curries, and I actually quite liked what she cooked. And then my aunties and my grandmother from my dad's side, I used to have a lot of their curries. So I used to have West Indian food from my mum's side, and then curries from my dad's side. But for me, I have an appreciation of a lot of different food, but you can't beat a good curry.
Favorite holiday destination?
Ooh. Okay, so this is going to sound weird. Okay, I'm not going to tell you a holiday destination. I'm going to tell you a destination.
Favorite country?
Okay, I'm not going to tell you favorite country. I'm going to tell you the best place I've been. So in 2015, I spent 3.5 months in the West African desert in Mauritania, which is in West Africa. And it was the best time of my life. Not the most enjoyable time of my life, because I was living in a desert. It was really difficult. But in terms of like spiritually and mentally, what I gained from it was really profound. I feel like you got so many questions off the back of that.
I've got questions. This is not a quick fire round.
Okay, I'm sorry, man.
Go.
That's it. Like, the best place I've ever been was Mauritania.
I'm gonna ask the questions though. What was it about the desert? Because my cousin's done that. He's gone for a few months, stayed with Bedouins and everything. So what's about the desert that's so spiritually profounding?
So number one, going back to the idea, there's no distraction there. You're literally by yourself, like with all you can do is read or think or and so on. So that provides you an immense sense of clarity. Like the amount of clarity I had in those 3 months was incredible. Second thing is there isn't really an opportunity to sin. Like you can always sin, but it's like, the stuff, all the temptations that we're around in these, in our cities, you don't have that. So you're able to go on this really profound spiritual journey there. Like the clarity of my thought and the clarity of my dreams and stuff like that was really interesting. And then also just when you travel and you spend somewhere like in a desert for like over 3 months, you learn things about yourself that you never knew because you have time to reflect and to think and so on. So there's multiple benefits.
Also, you're surrounded by nature as well.
Yeah.
Because it's the same when we go. I've got family in Zambia in Africa, and when you're surrounded by nature, you feel completely different. You feel mindful. You feel fresh, clarity of thought. There's no internet in the jungle where we go, so it does make a difference. Back to the quickfire round. Favorite TV show?
I don't watch TV, bro.
Favorite YouTube?
YouTube? Okay, I'll tell you some of the podcasts I like. So I like Patrick Bet-David's kind of podcasts and YouTube. Don't necessarily agree with everything, but I feel like it's very comprehensive, very diverse range of topics. You learn a lot and so on. I like Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett's podcast is excellent.
Yeah.
And those are two that come to mind. There's probably others. But yeah, just interesting stuff related to faith and the world and stuff like that.
Favorite book?
Don't have a favorite book, but ones that come to mind, Malcolm X's autobiography was really good. I'm not going to do what a lot of Muslims do, which is my favorite book is the Quran, because that's like a given. But that one, Malcolm X. Beyond that, what else do I like? Okay, you do ask me for one. I'm going to give you that one.
And favorite day of the week?
Ooh, I would say.
Give you a clue. There's one at the back.
Favorite day of the week. Saturday.
Why? First day of the weekend.
Saturday's like Sunday's like you got to go to work the next day, and so Saturday's like the day you can actually kind of switch off if you need to.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a very interesting conversation.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Zaid.